Imagine being in Cairo in 1904, sitting in a hotel room at noon, and hearing a voice dictate a text that would go on to become one of the most influential and controversial books in modern occultism. Not a novel, not a poem, not even a philosophy book in the usual sense, but a revelation, a command, a declaration that a new spiritual era had begun. That is the claim behind Aleister CROWLEY's The Book of the Law. And whether you see it as divine transmission, magical inspiration, or one of the strangest psychological documents ever written, its impact is impossible to ignore. To understand why this little book still fascinates people, you have to start with Crowley before he became a legend. By 1904, he was already deeply involved in ceremonial magic, Hermetic symbolism, Kabbalah, and the esoteric currents surrounding the Golden Dawn. He was brilliant, difficult, rebellious, and obsessed with spiritual attainment. But the event that changed everything did not begin with some grand ritual he carefully planned. It began with his wife, Rose Kelly, who suddenly entered an unusual state and told him that a god was waiting for him. Crowley was skeptical at first, so he tested her. Again and again, she kept pointing him toward Horus. That led them to the museum in Cairo, where Crowley found the famous funerary object now known as the Stele of Revealing. Its catalog number, 666, only deepened the feeling that something uncanny was unfolding. Soon after, on April 8th, 9th, and 10th of 1904, Crowley said he received a dictated text from an entity called Aiwass, whom he later described as his holy guardian angel, or as a praetor-human intelligence. The result was Liber vel Legis, the Book of the Law, written in 3 short chapters over the course of 3 days. And this is where people usually make their first mistake. They assume the book matters because it is shocking. It does contain harsh passages, riddles, ecstatic language, and lines that can sound dangerous when they are stripped from their context. But the reason it matters goes deeper than scandal. Crowley, and the tradition that followed him, saw this book as the central scripture of Thelema, a spiritual and magical system built around one of the most quoted and most misunderstood lines in occult history. "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." At first glance, that sounds like pure selfishness. Do whatever you want, break rules, follow impulse, chase pleasure. But that is not what Crowley meant, and in my opinion, this is exactly where most people misunderstand the Book of the Law. In Thelema, will does not mean random desire. It means your true will, the deepest course of your being, the pattern of action that is actually yours to live. Not every craving is true will. Not every act of rebellion is freedom. In fact, many people spend their whole lives obeying fear, social pressure, family expectation, or compulsive desire, all while telling themselves they are being free. A simple way to understand it is this. If a planet moves in its proper orbit, it expresses its nature without collision. If it swerves wildly, chaos follows. True will is like that inner orbit. For experienced practitioners, this is not just a poetic idea. It becomes a discipline. They meditate, keep magical diaries, observe repeating patterns in their lives, and test themselves through ritual and self-examination in order to separate passing appetite from deeper direction. Someone may think their will is to dominate others, impress people, or constantly chase stimulation, when in reality, they are just reacting. True will has a different feeling. It is more focused, more precise, and often more demanding than desire. The famous second half is just as important. Love is the law, love under will. That line changes the entire tone. In Thelema, love is not sentimental weakness. It is the force of union, relation, and attraction. But it has to be aligned with will rather than dissolving into emotional confusion. That is why the system is not simply about personal liberty. It is about discovering what you are, aligning with it, and then moving through life, relationships, work, and even spiritual practice from that center. The Book of the Law expresses this through 3 divine voices. The first chapter speaks from Nuit, the goddess of infinite space and possibility. She is the boundless totality, the star-filled body of the cosmos, the idea that every person is a star moving through an infinite field. The second chapter speaks from Hadit, the infinitely small point, the secret center in every being, the spark of consciousness, motion, and inward fire. If Nuit is the circumference, Hadit is the point. If Nuit is the endless sky, Hadit is the flame at the center of your experience. Together, they form one of the book's deepest metaphysical ideas. Reality is both infinite expanse and intimate center. The third chapter speaks from Ra-Hur-Quit, a form of Horus associated with force, sovereignty, action, and the energy of a new age. This is where the book becomes more than mystical poetry. It becomes a proclamation that the old spiritual model had changed. Crowley taught that human history could be understood through aeons, vast religious and psychological eras. In very simplified terms, the Aeon of Isis centered the Great Mother. The Aeon of Osiris emphasized suffering, sacrifice, and the dying god, and the new Aeon of Horus demanded maturity, self-knowledge, strength, and responsibility. Whether you take that literally or symbolically, you can see why the book still feels modern. It tells people to stop begging for permission and start discovering what they are here to do. That is also why the Book of the Law remains powerful for readers who are not Thelemites. Even outside formal Thelemic practice, its core challenge is hard to ignore. Are you living from your deepest center, or are you being lived by habit, guilt, and noise? And that question has practical consequences. Serious occultists do not just read this book once and quote it online. They work with it. They recite passages ritually. They compare its symbols with Hermetic Kabbalah, tarot, astrology, and initiation systems. They use it alongside practices like Liber Resh, ceremonial invocation, breath discipline, and long-term self-study. The goal is not to imitate Crowley's personality. The goal is to discover your own law. One reason the text still causes debate is because it refuses to behave like a modern self-help book. It is deliberately layered, compressed, and sometimes opaque. Crowley himself wrote extensive commentaries on it, and later writers like Israel Regardie, Lon Milo Duquette, and Kenneth Grant helped shape the way different readers approached it. Some treat it as sacred revelation. Some see it as an extraordinary magical text encoded in symbolic language. Others see it as a fusion of mysticism, ego, genius, and myth-making. Honestly, part of its enduring power comes from the fact that it survives all 3 readings. And that brings us to the real mystery. What exactly happened in Cairo? Was Aiwass an independent intelligence, a higher aspect of Crowley's own consciousness? A ritual opening that allowed something transpersonal to speak through symbol and voice? To me, that question is fascinating precisely because the book still works even if you never settle it. If you read it only as superstition, you miss its philosophical force. If you read it only as psychology, you may miss its initiatory power. And if you read it dogmatically, you may miss the demand it places on your own direct experience. There are also details that keep the legend alive. The book is short, yet entire magical orders built themselves around it. Its reception happened over exactly 3 days, and each day produced 1 chapter. Crowley did not originally understand the full weight of what he had received. In fact, his relationship with the book evolved over the course of years. That detail matters, because it makes the story stranger, not simpler. The prophet of the text did not instantly become its perfect interpreter. So, how is the Book of the Law viewed today? Among Thelemites, it is the foundational holy book of their tradition. Among students of Western esotericism, it is one of the key documents in modern occult history. Among critics, it is often seen as brilliant but troubling, visionary but unstable, profound but entangled with Crowley's excesses. All of those perspectives exist for a reason. But reducing the book to scandal misses the point. The real reason it endures is that it speaks to a crisis that still feels incredibly current. How to find spiritual meaning without surrendering individuality, and how to affirm individuality without collapsing into chaos. If this video helped you see why the Book of the Law is more than just a notorious occult text, hit like so more people can discover the deeper side of these subjects. And I am curious what you think. When you first hear, "Do what thou wilt," does it sound liberating, dangerous, or both? Let me know in the comments. In the end, Crowley's Book of the Law is not important because everyone should accept it. It is important because it forces a confrontation with freedom, with destiny, with the possibility that beneath personality and conditioning, there is a deeper pattern trying to emerge. And maybe that is why this strange little book, received in a Cairo hotel room more than a century ago, still feels alive. It does not just ask what you believe, it asks what your life is actually for. And maybe that is the question people keep coming back to, whether they approach this book as magicians, skeptics, mystics, or simply curious readers. So tell me in the comments, was Crowley receiving a real entity, contacting a deeper layer of mind, or creating one of the most powerful spiritual myths of the modern age? Subscribe if you want more explained videos on Thelema, Hermeticism, Gnosticism, sacred symbols, and the hidden anatomy of the soul. Share this with someone who thinks occultism is all surface and no substance. And when this video ends, click the playlist on screen, because the deeper you go into these traditions, the more the symbols begin to speak to each other.